I've known Peter for several years, and I'm really impressed with his call to ministry. I think he's so sincere, both in person at Committee on Ministry meetings, and I think it really came through in his paper, too, how much he feels called to ordained ministry, and I think that's just a blessing to all of us and to the church. I think he's a very fine writer. I found his paper to be very thorough theologically. And I think that he is just a wonderful person. I think he has so much experience within the church on all kinds of levels, his music ability, his administrative background, his experience with youth. I just think he's bringing the whole picture to us, and we are blessed. So, Peter, I thank you for all the work that you have done to get to this point tonight, and pray many blessings upon your presentation. Is that sufficient?
That's
okay.
perfect.
So you don't need.
That's what I was hoping.
Okay.
So fun. I have to toggle between glasses here. I'm getting used to my new cataract surgery. Just a point of information. In exchange during one of Peter's MID renewal interviews, a comment was made noting that Peter had been working in churches in a broad variety of settings for about 20 years. The comment was, "You have strength with youth and music and administration. You have a lot that most people don't have moving into an ordination track," to which Peter, in his usual playful, always humble way, says, "Yes, I'm quite a package." Remember this. There you go, not your average bear. Well, the simple truth is Peter is quite a package. As you've noticed, the cover of the bulletin has a picture of the Swiss Army knife. Most who know him would say that that is a most appropriate image of his broad pastoral, relational, practical, creative, and ministerial gifts. Now, in a few minutes, you're going to hear from Peter about his journey toward ordination in the UCC. But first, here are the credentials which, at least in part, support Committee on Ministry's recommendation that he be cleared for ordination pending call. So this is the list. In the fall of 2010, Peter was admitted to Boston University School of Theology seeking a Master of Divinity degree as a part-time student. In December of that year, he was welcomed as a member in discernment with Pilgrim Committee on Ministry, with Quincy Point as his sponsoring church. He is very well known here, as Peter's not only grown up in this church, but had previously served as administrator, youth director, choir director, and you worked with children's programs. His LCDT, or his local church discernment team, is chaired by Deanna Bunshagan. Where's Deanna? I'm going to ask Deanna to stand. Now, would everybody else who's been part of the local church discernment team also keep standing? Would you please stand? Anybody else? If any of you have served on that committee, this committee for Peter or any other, it is such an important part of what we do. You build that relationship, you build a real important bond of trust. You build up the body of Christ in the local church, in the larger church, and really do guide the candidate, and it just means so much to us. January 2012, Peter completed his social justice cultural competence project in partnership with City Mission Society and Hope Central Church in Jamaica Plain. Peter's focus was homelessness in Boston. He helped create the FACE program, F-A-C-E, Faith and Community Engagement. It was a homelessness awareness program for church youth groups that ran for 5 Sundays in the winter of 2012. In March of 2012, he completed his psych eval at BU's Danielson Institute. In May of 2012, Peter completed his field ed at Hope Central Church in JP. In November of 12, he became the minister to children and youth at the First Congregational Church in Reading, a 2-year contract. In May of 2013, he completed UCC History and Polity at Harvard Divinity School. And then he's back here. Summer of 13, he became sabbatical pastor here. He was granted licensure by the Committee on Ministry. In the summer of 14, he completed CPE at New England Baptist Hospital. In September of 14, Peter was hired as half-time pastoral assistant here at Quincy Point during Pastor Ann Suzadel's medical leave. And in the fall of 2016, he was named interim associate pastor here at Quincy Point upon the retirement of their longtime pastor and the arrival of interim pastor Stan Duncan. In September of 2016, Peter completed boundary awareness training through the Barnstable Association. In September of 2016 through August 17, Peter completed the 3-part Foundations of Transitional Ministry training and was certified in August of 2017. In September of 17, the Committee on Ministry unanimously voted to recommend that Peter proceed to his ecclesiastical council, "This is why you are here," pending successful completion of his final online course at Chicago Theological Seminary in interpreting the Hebrew Bible. And in January 2018, having received an A- for his final course, Peter graduated from Boston University School of Theology with an MDiv degree. Now let's hear from Peter.
I was told that I was supposed to have a Bible and a copy of my paper. Should we need some?
Please raise your hand if you can answer this statement in the affirmative. My life turned out just the way I had planned it. That's certainly not true in my case. In my paper, you can read about the long and twisty road that brought us here to this place tonight. Somebody said this to me the other day, "Oh, you're a second career minister." And I don't think that's quite fair to classify me that way as a second career minister. I went right from the delivery room at the hospital to the parsonage, and I didn't leave. I got my first paying church job when I was 15 years old. I was playing the organ at the early service at the Housneck Congregational Church for $25 a service. Here's the thing about me. In any secular, in addition to any secular employment that I've ever had, I've always had a church job, almost always. And it's been in Christian education, and youth ministry, and church administration, and church music. It's been in big urban churches and small suburban churches, each job providing experience to do the next thing. In my work as a conference staff person, and then doing work for the national church, I came to understand how this all fits together, this denomination of ours. What a covenant. What a joy divine. I have preached several times from over there on God's unlikely prospects, how God calls imperfect people. And I feel that's the case with me. I always thought I'd be a good lay leader in the church. I might even make it to church moderator, or maybe a pastor's spouse. But here we are tonight. So, I want to tell you about me. God has different ways of calling people to ministry. For some people, the process is they hear God's call, and then they get educated and they study and licensed and ordained, and then they go and do that work. In nearly every case in my life, It's more like I pick up the phone and God sends me somewhere and I figure it out as I go along, using formal education as an absolute last resort. It's a sort of fire, aim, ready approach to ministry. And it works for us, for me and God. God has plunked me down in some unlikely places. I have been blessed to do ministry at a summer camp, to be behind the organ bench, in Sunday school, on youth mission trips, at a nursing home, in classrooms, in conference centers, and a farm and a halfway house. And I've taught little kids and youth leaders and church administrators, and they have taught me. I've also been surrounded by some of the most gifted and faithful people in the church and the world. Some have gone to the heavenly places, and some are here in this room. And I'm grateful for all of those people. The next part of my presentation is in the form of a play, Reverend Gifford. So when you write an ordination paper, you write it in 3 parts. You have part A that gets widely distributed, and parts B and C are seen by the committee. So this was part B of my paper. And it's a play in 2 acts, and there are 2 characters, me and God. I can tell you all with certainty the moment that I heard God calling me to ordain ministry. Again, as a church musician, it had been my practice to take the week after Christmas and Easter off. Those seasons are the most demanding of the liturgical year. So on a Tuesday, in the week following Easter in 2010, I was on the couch at home, happy and tired from Holy Week, with all of its pageantry and glory. And whatever was on TV that day faded from my consciousness, and a different conversation emerged. Now, I was 47 years old, and I was working part-time at this church, and part-time at this church, and part-time at this church, doing a variety of things. And part of it was I was going to turn 50, and I was like, I don't think I can do this part-time thing in all these places with no benefits. So I was thinking to God, we should do something about this. And along with this feeling was this restlessness of spirit and a yearning to make more meaning in my life. And I couldn't imagine what to do next. It looked as if I was going to have to leave the church as a primary employer if I wanted to make it financially and have a shred of hope for retirement. Instead, in the form of a play, this is what happened. Cast of characters. Peter, a man in his late 40s, struggling along the path. God, eternal being, maker of heaven and earth. Act 1. The setting is we are in the apartment of Peter Johnston. The apartment has mismatched furniture and has a messy, bacheloresque feel to it. When the curtain rises, Peter is casually dressed, unshaven, and on the couch facing the television.
Peter, go to seminary. I need you.
God, we've had this conversation before. There's no way that I can afford to do this, and no guarantee that I'll be able to do it. Besides, I already work for you. Send someone else.
Peter, go to seminary. I need you.
But God, you know I am not good. Do you remember high school? I am not good at this education thing.
Go to seminary. I'll go with you.
Yeah, just like you were with me in college?
Yeah, that was different. You weren't ready yet.
Nope, not going, God. The instruction says that God knocks Peter off the couch and lets this blinding light through. On the floor, shielding his eyes from the said blinding light, Peter says, "Ouch. Fine, God, I'll do that, but don't say I didn't warn you."
Oh, Peter, why do you persecute me?
God, who's persecuting who here? This is really big, and I don't think I can do this. I'll die in seminary.
You are so melodramatic. We've got this. Let's go.
End of scene 1. Act 2, same apartment, same couch, piles of textbooks litter the scenery. 7 years have passed. Peter's hair is grayed a bit, but there's this glint in his eye.
Hey, how you doing, sport?
That took longer than I thought, God. Now what?
Well, you can relax a bit this summer, but while you're relaxing, you need to write your ordination paper and get ready for your ecclesiastical council. And there's this profile thing.
God, how come Moses didn't have to write a paper? What about Moses' ecclesiastical council?
You want me to send a burning bush?
Okay, God. I'm nervous about this. Lots of changes, but I trust you, really.
I've searched you, and I know you. You're ready now, and I'm going to be with you until the end of days.
Okay, God, I'll see you Sunday. End of play. After this episode, a startling revelation came. It's not that I was putting off serving God or putting off ordained ministry. I was putting off graduate school. And by the grace of God, and with the support of my family and a whole cloud of witnesses, I did it. It was a struggle and a slog, and there were setbacks, but there was also grace in that experience. One of the best qualifications that I bring to ministry is that I am a dyed-in-the-wool New England cranky Congregationalist. I was born almost at the same time as the United Church of Christ. I love the work of the church. I love the work of the associations. I love that we're part of this larger national church. And that's not to say that sometimes a more straightforward, less consensus-based way of coming at decisions and doing things in the church would be better. But it's ours from our inception, from the Cambridge platform on. In my paper, I describe myself as a Trinitarian Universalist. And that seems to make people go, huh? But it simply means that I believe in the Trinity, and I believe in universal salvation. I really do love being a local church pastor. I want to be the church when folks need us, at times of joy and times of sorrow, when we baptize and teach our children and adults, when we walk with our youth as they begin to figure out what's next and where they and God fit into it. We need to be praising God in the pew, in the pulpit, in the lectern, in the choir loft, and on television, and in the public square, in coffee shops, on the sidewalk, in the hospital, and in funeral homes. God has so much work for us to do here on earth. At the final interview with my committee on ministry, I was asked exactly what it is that I do here at Quincy Point. I joked, "A helper he amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing." But this impromptu position, which I got by picking up the phone, I was actually going to be the minister of music and outreach at a church in Lowell when the phone rang. And I felt like I needed to be here. And this experience has given me 4 solid years of all kinds of pastoral experience. It's like field ed on steroids. Not protected by a supervisor, everything. And this experience here will carry me into the next thing, like all those other experiences did. You might wonder why, about that pocket knife, and there's a story behind it. Stan Duncan calls me the Swiss Army knife of ministry, referring to all these skills that I have. And I bring it up because it brings up an important point. A pocket knife with all of its tools extended, you can't do anything with that. And so my call, I can't go to church and be expected to do all of those things. I can't be the pastor, the organist, the secretary, and the youth director. My call is to be a pastor and to be informed by all of the experiences that have led up to this moment. In our closing hymn, we sing, "Should the threats of dire predictions cause us to withdraw in pain, may your phoenix blazing spirit resurrect the church again." And I hear a lot of truth in that. Every day I am confronted either on social media or at a conference or at a church meeting or in one of the many self-help books that people are publishing about the church with some new approach to address the decline of mainline Protestantism. Or some big megachurch guru blogging about how well his church is doing, and by the way, it's always a his, bragging about how his church is doing and how mine can be like his too. But I'm not despondent about this, because I know other things. If you look around this place, it is an average-sized urban church, lots of gray hair and white skin. But this church has been on a journey to include more people. The church has an elevator that stops on every floor here. I don't know of any other church that has Braille editions of the Pilgrim Hymnal and the New Century Hymnal. We have large print bulletins, and not without a lot of controversy, we've started a conversation about open and affirming. This church has opened its doors to leaders of different faiths and invited people into sacred dialogue. All of this in the midst of searching for a new pastor. All of those things happened in the last few years. The church, like the church, needs to change. And one thing that seems so simple to me, and I've been in a lot of churches, but it seems so hard to practice, is that we need to not only open the doors and let people, whoever they are and wherever they are on life's journey, in, but we also need to step out of those doors. And we need to look around and see who our neighbors are, because they're not the people they used to be. We need to discern what God is calling us to be and who we're supposed to minister to. The practice of sitting inside and waiting for people to show up, and then asking the people that are like us to join the church and rewarding them by putting them on a committee, used to work for us. But we need to practice extravagant welcome. We need to welcome everyone, and I'm not talking about just race or sexual orientation. We need to welcome people with physical and emotional disabilities. We need to welcome the crazy cat lady. We need to stop saying, if only we could get some young families in here, we would be saved. What we need to do is build a bigger table. What we need to do is draw a wider circle and welcome everyone. So next week, God willing, I'll be sending on my ministerial profile, and the magic of technology will cast it far and wide. Kind of like online dating. Michael says they should develop an app called Minder, which is Tinder for ministers and churches. This ecclesiastical council represents a lot to me. If I am worthy, it means seeking a new call, moving out of my house, saying goodbye to Quincy Point, and maybe going far away. I may be anxious, but I'm not worried. Hear these words from the Apostle Paul writing to the church in Rome. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to God's purpose. Amen? Amen. Thank you. I need a drink.
Did you say that out loud?
Of water.
Well, thank you very much, We really, I think, have a good idea of of who Peter is and how he came to be here tonight. And his faith is certainly shining. We now have an opportunity to make comments, ask questions. I don't know. What do you want? Easy questions? Hard questions? What are you looking for tonight? I'm sure there are some questions, some comments you'd like to make. So I'm going to call church by church, and you can let us know if you have something to say. First Church, Braintree.
Peter, in this period of church decline, where do you see or imagine hope?
This church has been around for a long time, and it has endured all kinds of things that are unimaginable to us. But it has this staying power, and I think the power in that is the power of the stories that we read and that are handed down and that we sing in anthems and the prayers that we pray. The story keeps going. And so maybe the church isn't going to look like this with the pews and the organ and the chandelier and the air conditioning if you go to this church. But the church can change. We used to meet in the catacombs. And so I have a great deal of optimism about that, but it's cautious optimism. I know people in the church. I know sort of what's going on. But I also think that there are ways that we can reach outside of ourselves and we can keep this faith going. And maybe it's not that we have 100 people in every church, and maybe it's not that we have a church building, but there will be a church because there is God and there is Jesus and there's the Holy Spirit. And we are the hands that do that work.
Thank you, Peter. Someone from Brockton?
Peter, just have a kind of a fun question. So you and I took finance.
Yes! Yeah.
Which not many people risk taking. My question is, from all your experience in ministry, what did seminary not teach your classes that would have been super important for the church today and for us going into ministry?
Maybe like boiler maintenance or how to end a church council at 4:30 in the morning, or I railed in seminary about the fact that I was doing all these theoretical things, but they weren't, but I wasn't really learning exactly how to be a pastor. And I think that you learn to do that by observing and being and doing. And so do you know that I never baptized a baby until I baptized a baby? And the grandmother of the first baby is back there waving, so. And I never conducted a wedding ceremony until I conducted a wedding ceremony. Fortunately, I was an organist and I had been to many funerals before I had to conduct one. But a lot of the practical stuff was not in that kind of academic program. And I wish that it was, because it can be really surprising. But thank you.
Thank you. Duxbury?
Yes, Peter, just a question. What was the most important or remarkable experience of your time at BU that assured you were headed in the right direction and the decision you made to ministry was correct?
I think some of the most profound moments were when I went to community worship and I saw other people doing things, and I heard the seminary singers singing. And I think that the community sort of enabled me to do that. This was really hard. And I don't even want to tell you about failing Hebrew Bible. I took it again, I got an A-, as you heard. But it was really, really hard, but it was worth the journey. And so many things, but basically being in community and watching other people do things.
Maybe you got it on the Central Square.
Not checked off.
Bob.
That's
Peter.
okay, you're here now.
Yeah. I know I don't look 70, but I've been bouncing around congregational churches for 50 years now as an adult, always involved in something, the wider church now for the last 30 years, a moderator of Pilgrim Association, seen all the happy side, seen the ugly side. I gather you're going to circulate your profile to seek a sole pastorate in a medium-sized church, or is that?
That's a different question that I can answer, but
Well,
God's going to have to help.
Okay, assuming that, you know, the trustees, so you get your call, the trustees of that church have given you a key, you get there early on Monday morning, you go in, and now you're going into the big office, the head office, you know, not the one over on the side that says associate, or the one over there that says Ministry of Music, whatever. What's your biggest fear?
Well, I do, as much as optimism I have, I fear for the church because we are so wedded to the way that the church is now. And, you know, in those self-help books that you read about in churches and things like that, they say you should have a praise band and you should have projecting up on the wall and you should do all of those things. And I think what gets left out of the equation is that there are people in the churches that have been here since birth who are 80 and 90 years old. And so I think the biggest challenge and the biggest fear is to sort of be the church and maintain its traditions and grow the church. And I don't know how much of that I can do.
Thank you. Gretchen?
I'd love to hear you preach someday. And yeah.
Every other week here at Quincy Point.
And yeah.
And on TV on Wednesday nights.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering if, in your experience of preaching so far, if you've had a favorite sermon or a favorite kind of preaching moment where you felt the connection happening in a special way.
I remember preaching about Trinity Sunday, and I really picked it apart. And I, in the sermon, said, I don't even know if I'm qualified to explain this. I don't even know if God wants us to understand the Trinity, but I'm going to try. And I talked about the Trinity, and I said there was an example about steam and ice and water and three things in one. But during that sermon, the congregation was right there. And after that sermon, they were just so excited to know about this, because we say Holy Spirit, we sing Holy Spirit, we do all this stuff, but we haven't really picked it apart enough so that people were curious about it. So I remember that sermon especially.
Marshfield Hills?
Hi, Steve.
Good luck, buddy. It's just beginning.
Are you calling me a cock-eyed optimist? Oh, good. More of those questions, please.
Norwell?
Peter.
Leanne.
Peter, you are one of those precious teachers, and have been in my life, who taught me so much about those things that seminary did not. So I thank you for that. My question for you, because you are truly the Swiss Army knife of church ministry. Jack of all trades, right? Renaissance man of the church. You have done it all. And as you recognize, you cannot do it all when you're in the role of pastor. And that's a hard thing, to put the tools that we might have in our pocket and tuck them away. And I'm wondering for you, what will guide you in discerning when to do that versus when to act and when to do do rather than step back and allow others to do or not. I guess I'm wondering, what is for you when you look back on so many churches that you've served in so many different ways, when you step back and sort of have that bird's eye view perspective of all that you've experienced and observed in the church, from working with so many different pastors and so many different ministers, lay ministers you've ministered alongside. What is it, what's the essence of pastoral ministry to you, that you will, that kind of central grounding focus of your call, that you will be able to refer back to in those moments where you're discerning what to do or what God would have you do? So in a nutshell, what is your call, and how have you how do you understand your call, and how do you, based on what you've observed in the church, how do you understand your purpose and your call as God has defined it? That's not the question we discussed me asking.
Really big question, Leanne. So one of the things that I learned when I was coming here is, if you're going to be a pastor, don't do the stuff that everybody else is doing. Now, I have a great relationship with the music program in this church, and I do get to play sometimes. Reverend Stan is going to play the Prelude on Sunday if you're here. But if you have people that are doing things in the church, let them do the things. And the rest will sort it out. And the phone will ring, and there'll be a person in the hospital, and somebody will want to be baptized. And you'll get a phone call, and it'll be really hard to do. But I often say, because a friend told me this, I may not be the best person to be here, but I'm the person that's here. And so I think the essence, there's a list of things to do. You have to preach, you have to go to meetings. But I think that by just saying, I don't need to type the bulletin, I don't need to, and just letting the church do the things that it does, that they don't need help with, that it gives you the time to do that. I'm also really passionate, and I don't know what to do with this because our seminary moved, but I'm really passionate about teaching parish, and really passionate about bringing students, 1, 2, 3. I learned that 3 students at a time from Mary Lou, by the way. But bringing students in and equipping them that way as well. So I guess I'll get to pick and choose. I'm sure people will tell me what my job is. Over and over. But I have great faith. I have a good idea where I'm going, and I'll let you know. How's that?
Thank you, Peter. Is there anyone else from Norwell who'd like to speak? Okay, then we will move on to Plymouth.
Jean.
Peter, we go back 20 years. It's amazing.
We do.
I'm going to throw out my softball question and start with something else that piqued my interest when you were talking. You're a Trinitarian Universalist. So now, assuming that we don't know everything, I actually have it tattooed, then we will see face to face, and not a moment before. It keeps us humble. But saying that you are a Trinitarian Universalist, just tell me how that works with Charles Manson, Hitler, the score. Just, universalism, it sounds nice, but then you start running into difficult situations, and if universalism is the theology, then how do you also balance heaven, hell, theodicy, all the good stuff?
Softball question. Thank you, Jane.
Well,
Love you.
Wow.
So easy.
All right, Peter.
I didn't think anyone was going to ask me about that title.
Wow.
Yeah, no. I know. Okay, I think I said this in the paper. I read the paper recently, that I believe in the Trinity, and I believe that God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are God. And the God that I know, I was told, maybe by Gene, not to get into the trap of saying the Old Testament God and the New Testament God, but the God that I know is not a punishing God. I don't know. An interesting thing happened to me, though. We have a whole bunch of people, including my advisor, that are in Israel right now. And one of the people sent me a picture of hell. It's a place. It's an actual place that's above ground where children's sacrifices, often by burning, happened. And that's where the gnashing of teeth happened. And so I don't have a great construct of hell. I just know that the hell that Jesus was talking about was that hell and not Dante's hell. But I believe, I just can't believe that you can't get into heaven, this wonderful place that we're promised about. And I may be wrong, but the good news is, this is my ecclesiastical counsel on my theology. But seriously, I feel that, and I like to assure people of that. And it doesn't mean that there's not evil in the world. Oh my goodness, no. But I really haven't ever experienced God as anything but a loving God who resides in our hearts and our minds and in the church.
Let me just follow up. You're going to have people who really do believe in hell,
Mm-hmm.
and you just are going to have an explanation for that, because you're going to be very disappointed to find out that certain people probably just didn't have it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Anyone else from Plymouth?
Oh.
Just saying hi.
Hi.
You're getting these nice
Mike was my
hi.
advisor for the first half of this journey.
Quincy Hausneck.
Welcome to the neighborhood.
Yes, thank you. Peter, you and I was a member of Hope Central in Jamaica Plain when you were doing your field ed there.
And little did you know that we would be in this room together.
Right. The worship experience at Jamaica Plain is very powerful, and one of the reasons for that, I think, is their inclusion every Sunday of communion. Communion there is a very powerful experience, and so I wanted just to ask you about your understanding of the place of communion in the church. And now, I know in the Congregational Church, not every church does have communion every Sunday. In fact, perhaps once a month. But some are changing, and seeing that as an experience that is worthy of every Sunday. I just wanted to know what your understanding of the importance of communion is in worship.
Yeah, Hope Central is a very different church. And one of the things they do at the end of communion, because no one has accused them of being too Catholic, they have a whole rack of candles. And after communion, you can go up and you can light a candle in prayer. And I think that's some of the most powerful things that I witnessed there. I didn't like Hope Central because it didn't use a pulpit, which meant you had to preach from a music stand. But yes, we had communion every week, and it was served by not necessarily the minister. So there was usually somebody and then some layperson. And so it was a much more, not just served in the pews, people came up for it, but you would be concelebrating with somebody else who may not be ordained. And it was very powerful. I struggled because I am a dyed-in-the-wool Congregationalist, and we only have communion once a month. But I believe that communion can be incredibly healing. I had the experience of bringing communion to somebody just before they died, not too long ago. And I believe that it's a moment of real intimacy. I think I said this in my paper, that I really prefer to serve communion from doing it by intention, because most of the time we're remote, we're sitting up there and we're waiting for the deacons to serve it. So to me, it's been very profound. To me, it's very necessary. I struggle with Christian churches that don't have it. But I will say that most of my experience has been, we have communion on the first Sunday of the month, and if we did it, we actually did that in Lent at Wollaston. And I was the organist there, so it was a different thing. To me, it seemed like a lot, but that was just my experience. But I have two sacraments. And so for me, it's the essence of the church. And I would be happy to go to a church that did it every week, and I would be happy to go to a church that did it every month, and I don't think I could go to a church that did it less than that. Is that helpful?
Thank you, Peter. Who's going to take Quincy Point?
Stan, we talked about this.
Yeah, I was threatening Peter that I would ask him about the 4 different threads of penal substitutionary atonement and the various theologians through history that represent that each one, but I'm not going to do that.
You know, Stan, there's cake downstairs, right?
And the ice cream is melting, so... actually, I want to do 2 things. One is to just correct something that you said earlier. When you quoted me, you mentioned the Swiss Army knife metaphor that I had used to describe you, and you said that Stan was trying to say, or maybe you just went on with that because of all of the experiences that I had, each one of them was one of the blades of the Army knife, and put all those things together, and you open it all up, and you can't get anything done. You really need to focus on one particular thing, and so you were going to focus on parish ministry, something like that. That's not what I meant. What I meant is, I only know you mainly, that's not totally true, but mainly know you today as a parish minister, unordained, but still a parish minister. And in this particular focused parish ministry, you are still the Swiss Army knife. Because of all the things, you walk around this church, when you go downstairs, you'll see this big, huge Q on the wall that stands for Quincy and questions, and there's notes and things, and all that stuff was designed by Peter. Look at your stash of folders and brochures here in your church. All of these were designed by Peter. Look at the banner out in front, and that was designed by Peter. And look at all the pictures that, you won't see this, that are in the profile the church is putting together, and Peter took all those pictures. So you got this Swiss thing down pretty well. Not just in your history, but in your present as well.
And?
All right. The question, which is this is a real softball question, not like one of those you guys came up with. Softball question, but it's a good one though, I think, is that you're going into official parish ministry fairly late in life, though you've had multitudes of steps along the way. You really said you like to have internships in the church and bring in other people, students coming in. You will do that a lot. And you will be a mentor for a lot of people, whether you choose to or not. What is something that you could say in 25 words or fewer, I never have heard you do that, that would be your best advice, your best way of describing what would a incoming parish student, minister, candidate for ministry be best to know that you could pass on to that person right now?
Don't do anything the minute that you get there. This is their church. They know how things go. But I'm going to get this, I'll talk about that a little bit later at the end of this evening. But I think that to go into parish ministry with the assumption that it's all writing sermons and delivering them and praying, and not taking into account when the boiler breaks and when we've been broken into and when the 2 committees are fighting or whatever. The theological part of ministry is central, but there's a lot of stuff going around, and to not go in with a lot of preconceived notions of what the church, how the church works, and don't stomp around and say, these people don't understand, because they do. This is their church. So I guess take it slow. Turn in your reflections on time, preach once a month, you're good to go.
Thank you, Peter. Before we move on, is there anyone else from Quincy Point?
Oh, Reverend Trudy.
Hi. Peter, what are you going to do to take care of you?
Oh, I am so glad you asked.
Oh, that question.
Well, we talked about this. So first of all, I think you'll see in my paper that I talked about having a spiritual practice every morning. And that varies, and I think it'll get deeper and it'll change. But at least I have some contact in the morning and in the evening with something holy. And sometimes it's a piece of art, sometimes it's words. So that's part of taking care of myself. I also go to therapy, and I don't think anyone should enter into this without therapy or spiritual direction or something like that. I also talk to about 4 ministers a day, I figured out. You know, I've talked to about 30 of them today. And so I have this web of people that, and they're all over the country, talk to them on Facebook. So I have a place for that to go. Another thing is, I am so into Sabbath. So when I leave the church on Sunday, which is sometimes at noon and sometimes at 5 and sometimes later, through Monday night, that is discontinuity. So that's a time when Michael and I go on field trips and do anything that is not connected to the church. And I know that people will die, and I will have to make those responses. But Monday is a really sacred time for me. And I have a great relationship with my family who I can bring things to. My mother was a pastor's wife, so she knows this life pretty well. Anyway, so I have a huge support. I have conversations with God. And I know that it's important because I know what it's like to live with a workaholic pastor. It sucks. And you can't do ministry if you're going to respond to everything all the time. And so I have learned from really good ministers and other kinds of ministers that Sabbath is holy and it's important, and you will die in ministry if you feel so connected. And you know, the church needs to take on some of the work. So maybe it's a deacon that follows up with somebody that has died and says, on Tuesday you'll meet with a minister, or does some visitation, you know, so that anything that's urgent everything doesn't have to come through me. People's Church, they can do that work as well. And so, but just knowing that you can't do that, particularly as a solo pastor, is great wisdom that I've gotten, and it helps me. I mean, I can go to work on Tuesday morning now because I have not had to deal with the church on Monday. And as I said, there are exceptions. People die. I have to take phone calls. But church council meets on Monday night in this church, so that's not really helpful. But plan the Sabbath time.
Thank you, Peter. Is there anyone else from Quincy Point? Okay, we're going to move on to Quincy Bethany.
So first, I apologize for being late, but I wanted to be here for you this evening. Not really a question, although I was going to pick up where Stan left off on the atonement, but just to say that Peter and I, we grew up about 100 yards from each other, and we've traveled a similar path along the way.
Well, I didn't become a Romanian Orthodox priest, however.
Okay, so there's that. Some of us took a little turn, but eventually we came back. But I just wanted to say that you have been a true friend to me. You've given me a lot of advice. Some of it I took, some of it I wish I had taken.
I told you.
But I am so looking forward to the day when you are pastor, minister in your own church. because I know that this has been a long time coming for you. And it's important for me to see you here and for me to be here tonight for you and support you. So thank you.
Thanks. In the city of Quincy, I'm referred to as First Peter because I was here first, and that is Second Peter because he came later. There are books about us in the Bible.
The next church on the list is Randolph, where I'm pastor. And I don't have any questions for you, Peter. I just want to make a comment about when we worked together at the Wollaston Congregational Church. And as Peter said, we had many, many field ed students who came through. We had a pastoral residency for turnaround ministers, and we really had a great time working together. And I learned a lot from you, Peter. But what I want to lift up tonight is that many folks might not know this, but Peter actually installed 3 showers in our building.
Well,
when he says not your average, he's really not your average. So I can really appreciate tonight hearing that, you know, as time has gone on and the 7 years that you've spent now on your education, your practical training, and getting experience here as well, I can really appreciate how there are times that over this time that you've kind of honed in from not doing such extravagant programs or building projects, I should say. But I just want to lift up how much I appreciated what you did for all of us over at Wollaston. So thank you. Situate?
Peter, I'm so proud of you. I just want you to know that. And I want the whole room to know that. It's been a long journey, and to see you grow has really been something. So, and thank you also for all of the things that you've taught me. We've worked together in several different churches, and it's been awesome. But you know, I didn't find God in the church. I met God on the beach when I was just a little kid. So it kind of struck me as odd when God called me to church ministry. But a lot of people don't go to church today, and they haven't met God in church. So where do you see God out in the world?
Well, I'm reminded of a minister and a priest, not a joke, a minister and priest in Framingham. They go to, I don't know if it's still called, it's Shoppers World, but this big mall in Framingham, and they sit in the food court, and they have a little picture, a little sign that says, "Talk to a non-judgy minister." And I think that is a great way to introduce people to the church. I will tell you one place that I found God that surprised me was last Ash Wednesday. For the first time, at Peter Preble's suggestion, we went to a train station and we did Ashes to Go. And I didn't really know about this theologically, but there was something inside of me that said we should leave the church every once in a while. And there was a woman who came up to us and she said that she was a lapsed Catholic and that she didn't think she could receive ashes at all. And I was like, hey, we're not even Catholic. Come on! Big table. But we talked about 100 people and imposed ashes on them. And I really found that there was a connection there. And I hope that my ministry will not entirely be within the church building.
Thank you. Sharon? Carol, do you want to ask a question? Sharon?
No question.
Okay,
Just a
all right.
blessing.
Thank you.
Let's see, Stoughton, Mary.
Peter, I had a meeting this afternoon with a member of my church who's working on his ordination paper. And so I'm going to ask you a question that I asked him. If you were sitting at the bedside of someone who was dying and the person is looking up at you imploringly, wanting to know what is going to happen to her when she passes, what would you say to her?
Well, the best example that was ever given to me by another UCC pastor was, I won't say I don't know, but I will say our faith teaches us that there is something better, something beyond this. I'm almost going to quote something that Estelle wrote, but this place of just amazingness where fear and pain are gone, and you get to reconnect with people. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's what our faith teaches, and I use the example, probably might have been in the paper. I wrote a lot when I was writing this paper, of Jesus on the cross saying to the robbers,